They said the Duke of Blackthorn never raised his voice. He never had to. When Cassian Ravenshade entered a room, the air itself seemed to recalibrate. Conversation stopped mid-syllable, wine glasses froze halfway to lips, and even the most arrogant lords in the kingdom suddenly discovered urgent interest in the pattern of the floor tiles. He had crushed 3 noble rebellions before the age of 30, absorbed 2 failing duchies through nothing more than the patient application of economic pressure, and once dismantled a decades-old conspiracy simply by asking the right man the right question at the wrong hour of the night. He did not punish with rage. He punished with precision. And no one in the kingdom of Valethorn had ever looked him in the eye and told him no. Until tonight. Until her, Guts. The winter convocation of the high houses began, as it always did, with the ritual performance of power. Lords in velvet and gold processed through the vaulted entrance hall of the royal palace at Velmore with the practiced grace of men who had spent their entire lives rehearsing importance. Ladies arranged themselves in deliberate constellations, each grouping a calculated signal of alliance, ambition, or careful neutrality. The chandeliers overhead, 47 of them, Cassian had counted once, because he counted everything, blazed with 1,000 candles, and the light they threw across the marble floor created the illusion of warmth without actually providing any. Cassian stood at the far end of the receiving hall with his back to the room, studying the frost that had formed along the bottom edge of the window glass. Outside, the capital stretched away into blue winter darkness, its towers and bridges and crowded merchant quarters reduced by distance to something almost beautiful. He preferred it at distance. Most things were easier to understand from a remove. "They're whispering about you already," said the man beside him. Lord Aldrich Fenmore, Cassian's chancellor, and the only man in the kingdom who spoke to him without first calculating the personal cost of every word, came to stand at his elbow. Aldrich was 63 years old, built like a retired soldier gone to comfortable weight, with a face that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by any of it. He held 2 glasses of wine and offered one to Cassian with the easy manner of a man who had long since abandoned ceremony between them. Cassian did not take the glass. "They're always whispering about me," he said. "Tonight's whisper has a particular texture to it." Aldrich sipped his own wine. "Lord Ashcombe arrived an hour ago with his daughter. The word is that the marriage contract you forwarded last month has not been signed." Cassian turned from the window. Not quickly. He never moved quickly when the situation called for patience, but with the deliberate shift of a man redirecting his attention from one problem to another, he considered slightly more interesting. "I forwarded a preliminary arrangement, not a signed contract. The distinction may not have survived the translation through 3 houses of gossip. Ashcombe is in debt to 3 banking concerns and owes the crown a land use settlement he has been avoiding for 4 years. The arrangement I proposed would have cleared all of it. I assumed he would have the basic intelligence to understand what he was being offered." "And the daughter?" Cassian said nothing for a moment. He had read the report his intelligence network had assembled on Lady Seraphine Ashcombe. He read reports on everyone who was likely to intersect with his interests. She was 24, educated beyond what most noble houses considered appropriate for a woman, and had reportedly managed her father's financial correspondence for the past 2 years after the man's drinking had made him unreliable with numbers. The report had noted, almost as an afterthought, that she had once rewritten a trade agreement her father was about to sign at considerable personal loss and presented the corrected version to the other party's lawyers without telling him. The other party had accepted the revision. Lord Ashcombe had never learned the original terms. Cassian had found that particular detail more interesting than anything else in the file. "The daughter," he said finally, "is not my concern tonight." Aldrich made a sound that was not quite agreement. The formal receiving line moved with the sluggish ceremony of all such occasions, and Cassian endured it with the particular stillness of a man who has mastered the ability to be physically present while his mind works elsewhere. He accepted bows and curtsies and murmured pleasantries from 47 nobles. He counted those too, while behind his eyes he was revising his assessment of the political geometry of the room. Lord Harwick Crane, whose Eastern shipping interests had been aggressively absorbing smaller trade routes for the past 8 months, was standing too close to Duke Marath of the Southern Reaches. That was new. Crane had previously kept careful distance from anyone whose political ambitions might complicate his commercial ones. Either Marath had offered him something substantial, or Crane had decided that the current balance of power was about to shift and was repositioning accordingly. Either explanation was worth investigating. Lady Orsden, whose family controlled 3 of the 6 mountain passes into the Northern Territories, was conspicuously absent from her usual alliance cluster and had attached herself instead to the Crown Prince's lesser advisors. That suggested she had received information that someone in the Crown's inner circle was losing favor, and she was auditing her options before committing to a new position. The prince himself stood near the dais looking handsome and slightly bored, which was his natural resting state and therefore uninformative. And then Cassian reached the end of the receiving line and found himself standing in front of Lord Ashcombe. Gerald Ashcombe was 51 years old and looked older. The drinking had done visible work on him. The ruined capillaries in his nose, the slight unsteadiness in the way he held his shoulders, the too careful enunciation of a man monitoring himself. He was sweating lightly despite the cold of the hall. When he bowed, the bow had a trembling quality to it, the reflex of a frightened man. Behind him stood his daughter. Cassian had not expected to notice her the way he did. She was not the most beautiful woman in the room. There were women in the hall who had spent more money on their appearance tonight than Ashcombe had earned in the last 3 years, and it showed. Lady Seraphine wore a gown of deep blue that was elegant without being extravagant, and her dark hair was arranged with a simplicity that suggested either that she could not afford elaborate styling or that she had decided it was not worth the effort. She stood very straight. Her hands were clasped in front of her with a stillness that was not the stillness of deference. It was the stillness of someone actively choosing not to betray their thoughts through their body. Her eyes met his. Most people, when they met Cassian Ravenshade's gaze directly, experienced a brief interval of recalibration, the instinctive animal assessment of proximity to something dangerous. Lords who had survived 30 years of political combat did it. Generals did it. Even Aldrich, who had known him for 20 years, still occasionally had that half-second pause. Lady Seraphine Ashcombe looked at him with an expression of composed, careful appraisal, as if she were the one deciding what to make of him. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then she dropped her eyes and curtsied with perfect form. Lord Ashcombe was saying something, an introduction, pleasantries, some variation on the ritual phrases of the evening. Cassian let the words register without fully attending to them. He was thinking about that look. "Your Grace," she said when introduced. Her voice was steady and lower than he had expected, with a precise diction that suggested she was fluent in several languages and had spent considerable time making sure her accent conveyed nothing that might be used against her. "The palace is beautiful tonight." "It is the same as it always is," Cassian said. "The candles are the same candles. The marble is the same marble." A very slight pause. "Then I suppose the beauty is in the occasion." "The occasion is a formality." Lord Ashcombe made a sound like a man attempting to laugh at a joke he did not fully understand. His daughter said nothing. The look in her eyes, carefully neutral, had acquired a quality Cassian recognized after a moment. She was revising something, some assumption she had arrived with, being quietly corrected in real time. He moved on down the line. Tid. The formal dinner was held in the East Wing's Great Hall, 200 nobles arranged by rank and political significance at tables that had been laid out with the precision of a general organizing terrain. Cassian sat at the high table beside the Crown Prince, who spent most of the meal asking his opinion on matters Cassian had already submitted written recommendations about, which suggested the man read his correspondence the way he read everything, selectively and late. The Ashcombes were seated at the third table. Cassian did not look at them directly. He did not need to. His peripheral awareness of the room was a skill he had developed so thoroughly over the years that it had ceased to feel like skill, and had become instead a kind of ambient information, the way a man who has spent his life near water develops an unconscious sense of the tide. He was aware that Lord Ashcombe drank 3 glasses of wine before the first course was removed. He was aware that Lady Seraphine ate with the careful appetite of someone who was either genuinely uninterested in food or who had decided that eating sparingly was less likely to betray nervousness than any other behavior available to her. He was aware that she spoke twice to the Lord seated on her left, and not at all to the one on her right, which suggested the one on the right had said something she found either offensive or beneath acknowledgement. After the third course, the Crown Prince leaned close with the conspiratorial air of a man about to say something he believed was private. Ashcombe approached my secretary last week, the prince said. Something about the land use settlement. He's hoping you might consider a renegotiation. There is nothing to renegotiate. He seemed to think the arrangement you proposed might be reconsidered, given his daughter's situation. Cassian looked at the prince. What situation? The prince had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. There was a prior engagement to young Harwick Crane's nephew. It fell apart 3 months ago. Crane's nephew took exception to some letters she had written to his family's steward about accounting irregularities in their shared property management. Apparently the letter was rather thorough. She found accounting irregularities. She documented them extensively and sent the documentation to the family's lawyers, in addition to the steward. Crane's nephew considered it a fundamental breach of trust. Cassian considered this. Outside, wind moved against the high windows with a sound like distant breathing. He had been stealing from her family's portion of the managed properties, Cassian said. It was not a question. I believe that was the substance of her documentation, yes. And Crane's nephew ended the engagement because she caught him and told his lawyers about it. Cassian reached for his wine glass and drank with the methodical patience of a man who was filing information in an order he would not share with the person across from him. Harwick Crane was at the second table. Crane's nephew, a young man of about 22, soft in the jaw and in the eyes, was seated beside him. They were leaning toward each other with the quality of men sharing a private discomfort. The pieces shifted into a different arrangement. Crane's proximity to Duke Marath this evening, which had registered as possibly commercial, acquired a second possible explanation. The arrangement I proposed to Ashcombe stands, Cassian said. If he hasn't signed, he should sign. He's been hesitating. I think he's waiting to see if a better offer appears. No better offer will appear. He may not know that. He should. The dancing began after midnight in the main ballroom, and Cassian occupied his customary position along the wall, not from any reluctance to participate, but because the wall offered a full view of the room, and he had found over the years that the information available from a wall position consistently outweighed whatever was available from the floor. He was listening to Aldrich's quiet report on a customs dispute in the northern ports when Lord Ashcombe found him. The man had drunk enough now that the careful monitoring had failed. His eyes were bright in the wrong way, and he had the overdetermined bearing of someone who had rehearsed this approach several times and was committing to it before he lost his nerve entirely. "Your Grace," Ashcombe said, bowing with the slightly too deep formality of the drunk and the anxious. "I wonder if I might impose on a moment of your time." Cassian looked at him steadily. "You're imposing on it now." Ashcombe pressed on. "The arrangement, the one your people sent over, I've been giving it considerable thought." "Have you?" "It's a generous offer, very generous. I want you to know that I appreciate that." He paused. "There are certain complications." "The complications are financial. The arrangement resolves them." Yes, it does. Yes. Another pause. Ashcombe's hands moved to adjust his coat, found nothing requiring adjustment, and returned to his sides. "My daughter has expressed certain reservations." Cassian waited. "She has ideas." The word came out with a texture that was not quite contempt and not quite helplessness. "About her own future. She's always had them, since she was a child. I assumed, when she was young, I thought it was something she'd grow out of, but she hasn't, and now—" "Bring her here," Ashcombe blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Your daughter. Bring her here. If she has reservations, I'd prefer to hear them directly." A complicated expression moved through Ashcombe's face, relief and dread arriving simultaneously and fighting for dominance. Yes, of course. One moment, Your Grace." He retreated into the crowd. Aldrich, at Cassian's elbow, said nothing for a moment. "That's unusual," Aldrich said finally. "Is it? In 17 years I have never seen you request a conversation with a woman you hadn't already decided to marry." I haven't decided anything. Of course not. Aldrich's voice carried the careful neutrality of a man who had learned when to stop short of the full truth he was thinking. He drifted away with the practiced discretion that was one of his most valuable qualities. She came across the ballroom the way she had stood in the receiving line, with the kind of stillness that moved, if that was something that could exist. Her father was 2 steps behind her, and Cassian could see from the set of her shoulders that she was not happy about this, had not come willingly, but had made a decision that voluntary arrival was better than being brought. She stopped in front of him and met his eyes with the same expression she had worn when they were introduced. The careful, composed appraisal, the adjustment happening in real time, invisible to everyone except someone watching for it. "Lady Ashcombe," he said, "Your Grace." She curtsied, correctly, the right depth for the difference in their rank, precise and brief. "My father tells me you wanted to speak. Your father tells me you have reservations about the arrangement I proposed." A brief pause. Something moved through her eyes, a decision being made about how honest to be in the next sentence. Cassian watched it happen and found it more interesting than anything else that had happened this evening. "I have several," she said. "List them." She did not expect that. The composure fractured by perhaps a degree, not visibly, but the way temperature fractures very subtly in a room when someone opens a distant window. Then she collected it. "The arrangement, as I understand it, proposes that I come to Blackthorn Castle as your—" the phrasing in the document was "companion under the Duke's protection." That is correct. It doesn't specify what that means in practice. Companion is a word that has been used to mean several different things in arrangements of this type. "What do you think it means?" "I think it means whatever you decide it means, which is precisely my reservation." Lord Ashcombe made a muffled sound at her shoulder. She did not look at him. Cassian studied her face. The intelligence was right there on the surface if you knew how to look for it. Not the performed cleverness of women who had been taught that wit was a social currency, but something that ran deeper, structural, the kind of mind that couldn't encounter a system without immediately mapping its vulnerabilities. "You found accounting irregularities in the Crane estate management," he said. Whatever she had expected him to say, it was not that. Her eyes widened slightly. It was the first involuntary thing she'd done since she'd walked over, and she shut it down quickly, but he had already seen it. "That's not connected to—" "You documented them thoroughly and forwarded the documentation to Crane's family lawyers before informing anyone else, which ensured that the irregularities went on record before any interested party could manage the situation. Which tells me you understood that the steward alone would not act without pressure, and that Crane's nephew, if warned, would have time to construct an alternative account. You solved 3 problems simultaneously before any of them knew they were problems." A silence. The ballroom moved around them, 300 people in conversation and dance and the elaborate performance of aristocratic ease, and in the small pocket of stillness they occupied, she was looking at him with an expression he could not immediately name. "He was taking money that belonged to my family," she said, "for 2 years. I know. The engagement was meant to formalize a trade partnership. He was stealing from the partnership while arranging to make it permanent. The legality of that, if the marriage had proceeded, would have been complicated." "Which is why you acted before the marriage proceeded." "Yes. Without telling your father." A pause. "My father—" She stopped, started again. "My father has many qualities. Precision under pressure is not among them." Cassian looked at Lord Ashcombe, who had the expression of a man watching a carriage he was riding in begin to go off the road and being unable to do anything except hold on. "Leave us," Cassian said. Ashcombe looked at his daughter. She did not look back at him. "Your Grace, she is my—" "Lord Ashcombe." Cassian did not change his tone. He never needed to. "Leave us." Ashcombe left. Bats. The space between them, without the father present as buffer and witness, and the social fiction of parental protection, became a different kind of space. She felt it. He could see that she felt it, the recalibration, the reassessment of terms. She stood her ground and held his gaze and did not perform composure. She just was composed. the way a good blade is just sharp, without requiring announcement. You should know, she said, that this conversation doesn't change my position. Which position? I won't sign an arrangement that I haven't read in full and negotiated on equivalent terms. No one negotiates with me on equivalent terms. Then we've identified the problem. Something shifted in Cassian's chest. Not warmth exactly, nothing so soft as that, but a quality of attention that he recognized as rare. He gave it to problems that were genuinely worth his time. You understand your family's situation. I understand it precisely. 3 debt obligations, a land use settlement with the Crown that has been in arrears for 4 years, your father's health deteriorating in ways that will not improve, the estate's income insufficient to address any of it independently. In approximately 18 months, assuming nothing changes, you will be watching your home dismantled by creditors. She absorbed this without flinching. That was interesting too, not bravado, not performance, but the stillness of someone who had already sat with the worst version of this knowledge alone and was not encountering it for the first time. Yes, she said, I know. And yet, she agreed. Why? She looked at him for a long moment. The ballroom noise was a kind of distant weather. Someone across the room laughed at something, a bright social sound that belonged to a different world than this pocket of stillness. Because, she said carefully, a woman who walks into an arrangement she doesn't understand, with a man whose intentions are not explicit, in a position defined by a word that means whatever he decides it means, that woman doesn't have a family's financial problems anymore. She has every problem and no leverage. You think I'd mistreat you? I think I'd have no recourse if you did. Those are different statements. Cassian looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them moved. You want explicit terms, he said. I want legible terms. That isn't the same as demanding favorable ones. I'm aware of what I am and am not in a position to demand. Most people in your position would be grateful for any arrangement at all. I'm sure they would be. I'm not most people in my position. No, she was not. Cassian said nothing for a long moment. Around them, the ballroom continued its elaborate performance of social order. The dances and the conversations and the careful management of who stood near whom. A system he understood completely, had spent 20 years navigating and shaping, and which had never once surprised him. She had surprised him twice in the span of 10 minutes. Come to Blackthorn, he said. 3 months. With your own staff, 2 people of your choosing. Full access to the public areas of the house and to the estate records, subject to my review. A written agreement specifying that your family's debts will be serviced from Blackthorn accounts during that period, regardless of what happens between us. He paused. At the end of 3 months, we discussed the permanent arrangement, in full, with you at the table. She was very still. That's different from what you proposed to my father. Your father's version was appropriate for your father. This is a different conversation. Why? Cassian considered the question. He was not accustomed to explaining himself. He did not explain himself to his council, to his rivals, to the crown prince who relied on his judgment without fully understanding it. Explanations were a form of vulnerability. They made visible the reasoning, and visible reasoning could be countered. But she had asked him why, with the directness of someone who genuinely wanted to know and was willing to accept that the answer might not be good. Because you think clearly, he said, and I have a shortage of people around me who do. Something moved across her face, not what he expected, not pleasure or flattery's usual flush. Something more complicated, something that looked, in the candlelight and the noise of the ballroom, almost like grief. That is both the most honest thing anyone has said to me in months, she said, and the most alarming. Why alarming? Because it means you want my mind at your disposal, not... She stopped. Chose the next words with the care of a woman counting steps across ice. Not me. Cassian studied her. The distinction she was drawing was precise, and the fact that she was drawing it, that she could see the difference clearly enough to name it, told him something he had not fully understood about her until this moment. She was not afraid of being used. She was afraid of being used without being seen. Those things are not as separable as you think, he said. I found them to be very separable. Then you've been dealing with the wrong people. The silence stretched between them. She looked at him with the careful, honest eyes of someone who had run the calculation and was sitting with the result before announcing it. "I'll consider your proposal," she said finally. "You'll have until morning." "That's not—" "Lord Ashcombe's creditors are less patient than I am. Tomorrow's post will include a collection notice from the Brennan banking house. I've seen the schedule." He watched her absorb this. "Morning, Lady Ashcombe." She held his gaze for one more beat. Then she curtsied, the same precise, brief curtsy as before, and turned to go. She had made it 3 steps when he said quietly, "The steward your former fiancé was using to manage the funds, Perrin. Do you know where he is now?" She stopped, did not turn around immediately. When she did, her expression had changed, sharpened into something that was not quite alarm and not quite anger, and was in fact more useful than either. "No," she said. "I assumed he'd been dismissed. He's employed by Harwick Crane directly now. Has been for 8 weeks. She was very still. 8 weeks, she said. Crane's nephew did not end the engagement because you found the irregularities. He ended it because Crane told him to before you could take the documentation any further. Perrin knew what you had found. Perrin told Crane. Crane moved first. The calculation she was running was visible in the set of her jaw, the stillness of her hands, the careful nothing of her expression that was doing a great deal of work right now. "The documentation I sent to the lawyers," she said slowly, "the original copies, are in Crane's possession, yes. They could be used to show that I was investigating the family's financial affairs without authorization, without the engagement having concluded. It could be framed as industrial espionage or interference in a private commercial arrangement. Yes." She looked at him. The color had not left her face. She had too much control for that. But something had left her, some assumption she had been moving through the world on, some floor she had believed was solid. "How long have you known this?" she said. "Long enough." "Did you know it when you proposed the arrangement to my father?" Cassian looked at her. "Yes," he said. She exhaled once, a single, controlled breath, the kind that cost something. "And you're telling me now because you're deciding whether to come to Blackthorn by morning, and you should make that decision with full information." Another silence. The ballroom continued turning around them. "So the arrangement isn't generosity," she said. It's what it always is," Cassian said. "What everything is. An alignment of interests." He paused. "Whether that makes it less valuable to you is your determination to make, not mine." She looked at him for a long moment. The woman who had stood in the receiving line 2 hours ago, who had curtsied with perfect form and said the palace was beautiful tonight, that woman and this woman were the same person, but the room between them had changed completely. "I'll have an answer by morning, Your Grace," she said. She walked away into the ballroom and the crowd closed around her, and Cassian watched her go with the particular, rare quality of attention he reserved for problems that were genuinely worth his time. Behind him, Aldrich materialized from somewhere in the wall's vicinity. "Well," Aldrich said. Cassian said nothing. "That was not," Aldrich said carefully, "a conversation I expected to witness tonight." "What did you expect?" "I expected the usual. She'd defer. Ashcombe would sign. The thing would be done." A pause. "I did not expect you to tell her about Crane." "She needed to know." "You could have let her come to Blackthorn without knowing. She would have come anyway, for the family's sake. The Crane situation could have been managed later, on your terms." Cassian considered this with the honest care he gave to arguments that had merit. "Yes," he said. "I could have." "But you told her." "I told her." Aldrich was quiet for a moment. 17 years, he said. "And I think this is the first time I've watched you give someone the tools to walk away from you." Cassian turned back to the window. Outside, Velmore was dark and cold and perfectly, brutally indifferent to the arrangements of the people moving through its streets. "She won't walk away," he said. "You don't know that." "No." A pause. "But if she does, it won't be because I kept her blind." Aldrich did not answer. It was the answer of a man who understood something had shifted and was revising his own map accordingly. Seraphine found her father near the south corridor, nursing his fourth glass of wine with the determined misery of a man who has run out of better options. "Well," he said when he saw her face. She looked at him. This man who had borrowed against her future with the casual entitlement of someone who had never fully understood that she was a person who might have her own ideas about it. She looked at him and felt the old, complicated love that had never quite simplified itself into either resentment or acceptance. "I'm going to Blackthorn," she said. Relief flooded his face so quickly and completely that it looked almost obscene. "Thank God, I knew you'd... I told him you were a reasonable... I need you to understand something." Her voice was quiet. The ballroom noise covered them. "I'm going because I've decided to, not because you've run out of other options and taken mine with you. Do you understand the difference?" Ashcombe blinked. "Seraphine, do you understand the difference?" A long pause. Something moved through his face, something complicated that she suspected was the dim, alcohol-blurred shape of shame. "Yes," he said finally. "Good." She turned to leave. "He's not a cruel man," Ashcombe said behind her. She could hear him wanting to believe this. "From what I've heard, he's not cruel. Not—" "I know," she said without turning back. She did not know. She thought she might know something about what he was, had seen something in 20 minutes that she had not seen in years of dealing with men who held power over things she needed. She had seen him tell her something that made her harder to manage. She did not know what to do with that. She walked back through the ballroom toward nothing in particular because the evening had to go on and she had to be in it. And somewhere across the room, Cassian Ravenshade was standing with his back to the room again, watching the dark city through the window glass. And she was going to Blackthorn. She was going to Blackthorn, and the documentation that could ruin her was in Harwick Crane's hands. And the man who knew this had told her, and she did not yet understand why. And that unknowing was the most frightening part of all of it. More frightening than the debt, more frightening than the Crane situation, more frightening than the arrangement itself. She was about to step into a room she could not fully see, with a man she could not fully read, and every instinct she had said this was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. And some other thing, some cooler, more patient thing that lived below instinct, said it might also be the only door in the entire palace that led anywhere worth going. She reached for a glass of wine from a passing servant and drank it faster than was appropriate. Across the room, without turning from the window, Cassian Ravenshade said something quietly to his chancellor. The chancellor nodded once. By morning, 2 riders would leave Blackthorn Castle carrying messages that Seraphine would not learn about for weeks. Messages that set in motion a sequence of events involving Harwick Crane, a customs investigation in the eastern ports, and a letter to the Brennan banking house from a source they could not afford to ignore. Cassian Ravenshade had decided she was coming to Blackthorn. He had not yet decided what happened after that. But he had decided she would arrive with the Crane problem contained, which was the first decision he had made in 3 years that had nothing to do with consolidating power and everything to do with a woman who had looked at him across a receiving line with the eyes of someone taking careful measure of a door she wasn't sure she trusted. He turned from the window. The winter convocation continued around him, exactly as planned, exactly as it always was. Everything was different. He did not understand that yet. By the time he did, it would be far too late to do anything about it, and he would discover, to his own considerable surprise, that he did not want to. What none of them saw, not Cassian, not Aldrich, not Seraphine moving through the ballroom with wine in her hand and calculations running behind her careful eyes, was Lord Harwick Crane, standing near the east entrance with Duke Marath, watching. Crane had spent the better part of 20 minutes observing the conversation between Ravenshade and the Ashcombe girl. He had watched it with the particular attention of a man who has made a careful plan and is watching something happen that was not part of it. He turned to Marath. "She knows," he said. Marath's expression did not change. He was a man who had not survived 40 years of high court politics by letting things show on his face. "How much?" "Enough." He told her. A pause. Ravenshade told her. "Why would he—" "I don't know." Crane's voice had an edge to it now, the edge of a man revising in real time. But she's going to Blackthorn. Whatever arrangement he proposed, she's taking it, which means Perrin's work is now manageable, Marath said, with the quiet confidence of someone who has managed things before. The documentation is one copy, and copies can be addressed. Marath reached for his own glass. The question is not the documentation. The question is what changes if Ravenshade has a woman like that inside his house. Crane looked across the ballroom. Lady Seraphine Ashcombe had stopped near one of the tall windows and was standing very still, looking out at the city, and something about the line of her profile, composed, private, already somewhere else in her mind, made something cold move through him that he did not fully want to examine. "Everything changes," he said. Marath looked at him. "Then we have work to do before spring." The carriage arrived at Blackthorn Castle on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the winter convocation, in the kind of cold that had weight to it, the kind that pressed against the windows and found the gaps in wool and settled into bone before you noticed it happening. Seraphine had not slept well on the road. She had slept the way she slept when something was unresolved, which was fitfully and too close to the surface, her mind running the same calculations on a loop and arriving at the same provisional answers that satisfied nothing. She had 2 staff with her, as agreed. Maret, her personal maid, a woman of 40 who had been with the Ashcombe household since before Seraphine was born, and who communicated her opinions through a highly developed system of silences, and whose silence during the entire 3-day journey had communicated volumes. And Thomas, who had been her father's secretary before her father stopped being reliable enough to need one, and who was precise with numbers in the way that some people are precise with music, instinctively, structurally, without having to think about why. She had brought 2 trunks of clothing, 3 crates of books and ledgers, and a locked case containing copies of every financial document she had removed from her father's study before departing. She had not told her father about the locked case. Blackthorn Castle announced itself from 3 miles out, rising above the winter landscape with the particular self-certainty of a structure that had never needed to apologize for its presence. It was not beautiful the way the royal palace at Velmore was beautiful. Not the decorative beauty of something built to impress visitors. It was the beauty of something built to last, to function, to hold. The stone was dark with age and weather, and looked as though it had always been exactly that color, as though the landscape had grown up around it rather than the other way around. At the gate, they were met by a steward named Dorev, a man of about 50, with the compact efficiency of someone who had spent his career making large things run quietly, who transferred them from the carriage to the entrance hall with a minimum of ceremony and a precise accounting of what happened next. Rooms had been prepared. A schedule had been drawn up. The Duke would receive her at 3 o'clock. Seraphine noted the schedule without commenting on it. The rooms were good, larger than she had expected, with a sitting room that overlooked the eastern courtyard and had adequate light for reading. Maret inspected every surface and corner with the methodical suspicion she applied to all new environments, and Thomas immediately located the desk and began transferring the ledgers with the focused calm of a man who was most comfortable when there was something to organize. Seraphine stood at the window and looked at the courtyard below. There were soldiers drilling in the cold, 12 of them, moving through formations with the crisp precision of men who drilled this way every morning regardless of weather. A figure in a dark coat stood at the far end of the yard watching them, not directing, just watching. And even at this distance and from this angle, the quality of stillness was recognizable. Cassian Ravenshade, watching his soldiers train in the cold at 8 in the morning, alone, without an audience to perform the observation for. She stood at the window for a long moment, then she turned away and started unpacking. The 3 o'clock meeting took place in a room Dorev called the estate office, which was not an office in any domestic sense, but a working space. Maps on one wall, correspondence in organized stacks on the desk, 2 chairs positioned across from each other with the functional neutrality of a room where decisions happened. No decorative pretension, no performance of comfort. Cassian was already seated when she arrived. He did not stand. She noted this without registering offense. It had the quality of information, not discourtesy. "Sit," he said. She sat. "The rooms are satisfactory?" It was not quite a question. "Yes." "You brought staff." As agreed. A secretary. He looked at her steadily. Not a companion. Thomas is more useful than a companion. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly, the shape a smile would make in a face that didn't do them easily. I want to establish the terms clearly, he said, while we are both clear-headed about them. I'd prefer that also. He set a document on the desk between them. She looked at it without reaching for it. That is the written version of what I proposed at the convocation. Your family's debt serviced from Blackthorn accounts for the duration of your stay, access to the public areas of the estate, and to the financial records, subject to my review. The meaning of that phrase being that I will tell you what you may not see, rather than the other way around. He paused. Your staff are guests of the estate. They eat at the household table. They answer to you, not to my staff. And my obligations. You'll attend household dinners. You'll be present at whatever functions require a presence. When I require your opinion on something, I'll ask for it. When I don't, I won't. She looked at him. That's not a list of obligations. That's a social schedule. Yes. What do you actually want from me? The directness landed in the room without apology. He absorbed it the way he seemed to absorb most things, without reaction, without the reflexive performance of being unbothered that most men substituted for actually being unbothered. I told you at the convocation, he said. You told me you had a shortage of people who think clearly. That tells me what I am to you. It doesn't tell me what you want me to do. Those are the same thing. They're not. Wanting someone's mind at your disposal is different from having a specific task for it. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, wind pressed against the high windows. Somewhere in the castle's depths, a door closed. There's a problem in the Eastern trade accounts, he said. Has been for 14 months. My finance staff have reviewed it 3 times and produced 3 different assessments, none of which fully account for the variance. My chancellor believes it's a record-keeping failure. I believe it isn't. He paused. I want another set of eyes on it, eyes that haven't already decided what they're looking for. She looked at him steadily. You want me to audit your finance staff. I want you to look at the numbers and tell me what you see. Without telling them I'm doing it. I didn't say that. You didn't not say it. The quiet in the room had a texture to it. He was looking at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that meant he was running a calculation and had arrived at a result he found either interesting or inconvenient. They'll know you're here, he said. They won't know why. That's an uncomfortable position for me. If the problem is what you think it is, and if someone in your finance staff is responsible, I'm going to be in a house with that person, having looked at their work, and they won't know I've looked. That's correct. And if they find out, they won't. You can't know that. Lady Ashcombe. His voice had not changed in volume or temperature. It never seemed to, but it had a quality now that she felt at the base of her sternum, a frequency that bypassed thought and registered somewhere older. I have run this estate for 11 years. I have managed people who were actively trying to destroy me for 11 years without losing. If I tell you that you are safe inside Blackthorn, that is not reassurance. It is information. She looked at him, believed him. That was the part that frightened her. Not the content of what he said, but the fact that she believed it, immediately and without the internal argument she usually applied to things she wanted to be true. I'll look at the accounts, she said. He nodded once, pushed the document across the desk. She reached for it. The first week passed with the quality of water finding a new level, a slow, functional settling. Seraphine learned the architecture of the castle the way she learned most things, by moving through it systematically and paying attention to what the layout revealed about the priorities of the person who controlled it. The public areas were maintained with severe, functional elegance. The working areas, the offices, the estate rooms, the corridors used by staff, were clean without decoration, organized without waste. The domestic quarters where the household staff lived had better light than the formal guest quarters, which meant whoever had designed the space had understood that the people who worked there would do better with adequate light to work by. She noted this. She filed it. The finance records were delivered to her sitting room on the 3rd day by a man named Corvin. who was the head of the estate's accounting office and who had the manner of someone who had been told to be cooperative and had decided to interpret this as minimal compliance. He brought 6 months of ledgers, which was not the 14 months Cassian had mentioned. She thanked him pleasantly and sent a note to Dorav requesting the full 14-month run. The note came back with the missing 8 months within the hour, which meant either Dorav had anticipated this or someone had told him to facilitate it. She worked for 3 days straight, in the manner she always worked, with Thomas cross-referencing and the ledgers arranged in a particular order she had developed over 2 years of managing her father's chaotic records. The numbers were good. Whoever maintained Blackthorn's accounts was skilled and thorough and had produced records that were, on the surface, impeccable. The surface was not where the problem was. On the 4th day of reviewing the records, she found the first anomaly. It was small, a rounding variance in the Eastern Port receipts that appeared 4 times across the 14 months at irregular intervals. Each individual instance was trivial. In aggregate, they were not. She sat with it for an hour before she wrote anything down. Then she wrote, "The variance isn't random. The intervals map to shipment arrival dates." She stared at that sentence for a long time. She brought it to Cassian that evening during the household dinner she had been attending with the dutiful regularity of someone honoring an agreement. The dinners were not unpleasant. The household staff ate together in the great hall, which she had not expected. She had expected the Duke to dine separately, with whatever formality applied to that rank. He did not. He sat at the head of the long table and ate what the household ate and spoke when spoken to, and did not perform the distance that most men of his position used as a management tool. She had revised several assumptions during those dinners. She was running out of the ones she had arrived with. When the meal ended, she waited for the room to clear and then said quietly, "I need 10 minutes." He looked at her. "Now?" "The Eastern accounts. Yes, now." Something shifted in his attention. The quality of it sharpened, and she felt the shift as a physical thing, the way you feel a change in wind direction before you consciously register it. "My study," he said. She laid the relevant pages out on his desk and walked him through it without preamble, because she had learned already that preamble was not something he found useful. "The variance appears here, 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 and here." Her finger moved across the ledger pages. Each instance is small enough to dismiss individually. Together they pattern to shipment arrival records from the Eastern Port operation. He was standing beside her, not across the desk, which meant he was looking at the same thing she was looking at from the same angle. She was aware of this in the particular inconvenient way she had been aware of things about him all week, registered and filed without being able to entirely stop registering them. "You found this in 4 days," he said. "My staff reviewed the same records for 14 months, he said. It was not quite a question. They were looking for discrepancies. I was looking for patterns. Different search." A silence. He was reading the pages, following the thread she had laid out, and she watched his face, for the thing she was beginning to understand was the primary signal, not expression, but attention, the quality of what he attended to. "The man who processes the Eastern Port receipts," he said, "Corvin's deputy, named Aldrin. He's been in that position for 16 months. Cassian was very still. 16 months. 14 months of variance. "The variance started 2 months after he took the position," she said. "Not immediately. He waited. Waited. Long enough that the new posting period would explain any irregularities as adjustment. Long enough that the original baseline comparisons would be less useful." He turned and looked at her. In the lamplight of the study, his face had the quality of something carved. Not harsh, just definite. Every line of it earned rather than performed. "How certain are you, Chides?" he said. "Certain enough to show you, not certain enough to act on without more information." She paused. "The amounts are small. If this is what it looks like, he's been careful. Small amounts across a long time. Add up to a significant sum, yes, but the more important question isn't the amount." "Who sent him?" Cassian said. She looked at him. "Yes." Because a careful, patient man, one who waited 2 months before starting, who kept each individual variance beneath the threshold of notice, did not do this for personal gain alone. Personal gain was impulsive. This was architectural. Someone had placed Aldrin in that position with a purpose. Cassian moved to the window, not away from her, just to the window, which she had noticed was where he went when he was running something serious. The dark courtyard below was empty now, the soldiers long finished for the day. "You understand what you've found," he said. "I understand what I might have found. I'd want to verify before. You've found the edge of something larger." He was not looking at her. The Eastern Port operation handles a third of Blackthorn's trade income. If someone is positioned inside it with the intent to manipulate rather than steal, the amounts are not the point. "The data is the point," she said. He turned. "If the receipt records are being quietly altered," she said, "then the revenue figures Blackthorn's financial reporting is based on are not accurate. And if they're not accurate, then any decision made from them is made on bad information." He looked at her with the full weight of that attention. "Yes." The room was very quiet. Outside, the winter wind moved against the stone in the low, patient way of something that had all the time in the world. "There's something else," she said. She had not intended to say it yet. She had intended to verify it first, but he was looking at her with that attention, and she was running the calculation of whether being right was more important than being certain, and she made the same decision she always made. Say the thing. "The name of the shipping concern that processes the Eastern Port arrivals," she said. "Harwick Crane holds a minority interest in it, through a secondary holding company. It's not listed in the primary records, but it's in the registration filings from 3 years ago." The silence had a different quality now. "You brought the registration filings," he said slowly. "I brought everything I thought might be relevant, yes." "From your father's files." "From my own research. I began compiling information on Crane 8 weeks ago." She held his gaze. "When his nephew ended the engagement." Something moved through Cassian's face. Not surprise, she was beginning to think he was not frequently surprised, but something adjacent to it, a reassessment. "You've been building a file on Crane," he said. "I've been building a file on the situation I was in. Crane was part of that situation. And you brought it here." "I brought it here." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved to his desk and pulled a drawer open and set a separate folder on the surface beside her ledger pages. He opened it and she looked at what was inside. The same shipping company registration, additional documentation, correspondence records, port authority filings, 3 years of cargo manifests, more complete than what she had, more deeply sourced, assembled with the resources of someone who could reach into places she could not. "You already knew," she said. "I knew Crane had a connection to the Eastern operation. I didn't know about Aldrin." She looked at the 2 sets of documents side by side on his desk. Her folder, assembled from the outside with the resources of a woman who had been very carefully paying attention. His folder, assembled from within with the machinery of a duchy. "We were working toward the same thing," she said, "from different directions. And neither of us had the full picture." He looked at her. "Until now." The lamplight between them was very still. Somewhere in the castle a clock struck 10, the sound traveling through stone with the muffled patience of all old things. She understood, in that moment, what was happening. Not the Crane situation, that she understood clearly, the shape of it, the danger of it. What she understood was something else, something she had been aware of at the edges all week, in the dinners and the document delivery and the quality of his attention during the 3 o'clock meeting, and which had now moved to the center where she could not pretend to file it at the edges anymore. He had brought her here knowing this was what she would find, knowing that the thing she had been researching from outside and the thing he had been watching from inside would connect when she looked at his numbers. He had wanted her to find it, not because he couldn't find it himself, because he had needed someone whose path to it was different from his own. And she had taken it apart in 4 days with a secretary and a lamp and the particular quality of mind that had always made her inconvenient to the men who thought they were managing her. "The convocation," she said. "You knew then. About Crane and Aldrin both." "I suspected Aldrin. I didn't have confirmation." "You needed someone who could look at the records without already knowing what conclusion they were supposed to reach." "Yes." "You engineered this." "I created conditions," he said. "What happened in them was yours." She looked at him and felt the full, uncomfortable weight of being seen accurately. Not flattered, not managed, not positioned. Seen. The way the numbers were seen when you stopped looking for what you expected and started looking for what was actually there. The documentation I sent to Crane's lawyers, she said, the copy he has, is no longer a threat, Cassian said. I told you at the convocation that it would be addressed. You told me you knew about it. You didn't tell me it would be addressed. I told you to come to Blackthorn with full information. That was the address. She stared at him. You used my situation to make sure I would come willingly. I used your situation to make sure you had a reason to come that was yours, not your father's desperation, not my need, yours. The distinction was so precise and so ruthless and so correct that she had no immediate answer for it. She stood at his desk in the lamplight with the two folders side by side and the weight of the week's work behind her and the larger thing in front of her that was not just Crane and not just Aldrin, but the full architecture of what she had walked into and was still, even now, only partially mapping. If Crane knows I'm here, she said, if he connects my presence at Blackthorn to the Eastern accounts, he will try to move first. Before you've built a complete case. Yes. Then we don't have much time. Cassian looked at her across the desk. Outside, the winter dark pressed against the castle stone with its patient, enormous weight. No, he said. We don't. The word we sat in the room between them like something that had been placed there deliberately and could not now be taken back. Neither of them acknowledged it. Both of them heard it. 3 days later, a sealed letter arrived at Blackthorn Castle from Velmore. Not through the official post, through a private courier whose fee suggested urgency. Dorev brought it to Cassian during the morning briefing. Cassian broke the seal, read it in the silence of the assembled household staff, and set it on the desk with the careful deliberateness of a man controlling the precise amount of reaction he was willing to show. He looked up. Aldrin is gone, he said. Left Blackthorn's eastern office 2 nights ago. His rooms are cleared. The room absorbed this. Seraphine, standing near the window with her morning notes in hand, felt the bottom drop out of the timeline they had been working with. Someone had warned him. Someone inside Blackthorn had told Aldrin that the accounts were being reviewed, and Aldrin had run, and that meant the careful 14-month architecture of patient theft and data manipulation had just collapsed into emergency, and everything that followed would move at a completely different speed. She looked at Cassian. He was already looking at her. It came from inside the house, she said. Yes. The word landed in the room like the first note of something that could not be stopped now that it had started. The winter light through the windows was flat and cold and perfectly indifferent, and in it, Cassian Ravenshade's face had the quality of a man who has just had his final confirmation of something he suspected and is now deciding what to do with it. He picked up the letter again, looked at it once more, set it down. Find me the second anomaly, he said to her, with the calm certainty of a man issuing the first order of a war he has already decided to win, because there will be one. And before she could answer, before she could say that she had found it already, 3 days ago, filed at the back of her notes, waiting for the right moment, the second letter arrived. This one was from Harwick Crane, and it was addressed not to Cassian. It was addressed to her. The letter was not long. Seraphine read it once, standing at Cassian's desk with the winter light coming through the window at the angle it always came at this hour, flat and without warmth. And then she read it again, and the second reading was worse than the first because the first time she had still been hoping she had misread something. She had not misread anything. Crane's handwriting was precise and unhurried, the script of a man who had written this knowing he had time to be precise about it. Lady Ashcombe, I think you understand by now that the position you currently occupy at Blackthorn is not as secure as it has been presented to you. The documentation in my possession is one copy of several. I am prepared to make the contents public at a time of my choosing unless we reach an arrangement of mutual benefit. I suggest you consider what you owe to the Duke against what you owe to yourself. These are not the same debt. I will expect word from you within 5 days. Destroy this letter. She set it on the desk. Cassian read it once. He did not read it twice. The silence in the study had a different quality than the silence of the previous evening. That silence had been the quiet of two people working toward the same thing from different angles. This one was the quiet of something exposed. He knows I'm here, she said. He knows I've been looking at the accounts. Yes. Which means the person who warned Aldrin also told Crane about my work. Yes. She looked at him. The letter is addressed to me, not to you. He believes you're the weaker point. Am I? Cassian looked at her with the expression she had learned to read as his version of complete honesty. Not warm, not reassuring, just accurate. He believes you are. Whether he's right is a different question. He wants me to give him information about what we know, about how far the audit has gone. That's one possibility. What's the other? He wants you to leave. An empty house, a spooked woman, a story about why Ravenshade's new acquisition didn't work out. Clean and simple. It disrupts my investigation without requiring him to escalate. She absorbed this. Outside a door opened and closed somewhere in the corridor, the ordinary sound of a house going about its morning, entirely indifferent to what was happening in this room. He doesn't know about the second anomaly, she said. Cassian was very still. I found it 3 days ago, she said. I was waiting for the right moment to bring it. Show me. The second anomaly was not in the Eastern accounts. It was in the household records. The internal ones, the staff payroll, the supply contracts, the maintenance logs that were so routine and so granular that no one reviewed them with real attention because nothing significant had ever been in them. Something significant was in them now. She laid it out on the desk with Thomas's cross-reference notes alongside and walked Cassian through it the same way she had walked him through the first set. Without preamble, just the thread, just what the numbers said. There were 3 names on the household payroll that did not correspond to any staff member Dorev could account for. The names had been there for 9 months. The payments were small, the kind of small that lived below the threshold of routine review. Added together across 9 months, they represented a substantial sum leaving Blackthorn's accounts through the maintenance budget. Ghost employees, but not for money laundering. The amounts were wrong for that. Too small, too scattered. They're not taking money out, she said. They're moving it around. These payments route through a secondary account registered to a property management firm. I checked the registration. She set a single page beside the ledgers. The firm's address is a building in Velmore. The building is owned by Duke Marath. The room was absolutely quiet. Cassian looked at the registration page, at the payroll records, at her cross-reference notes. His face had the quality of a man who has just had a wall he was standing next to removed and is now looking at the landscape on the other side. Marath, he said. Crane and Marath, the convocation. They were together at the east entrance. I saw them. So did I. But this isn't Crane positioning himself for leverage. This is infrastructure. Someone has been building payments architecture inside Blackthorn's own accounts for 9 months. She paused and then said the thing she had been sitting with for 3 days. This predates Aldrin. This predates me. This was here before you proposed any arrangement to my father. Cassian turned away from the desk. He moved to the window, and she watched his back, and understood that what she was seeing was not a man composing himself, but a man running a calculation so large and so ugly that he needed a moment to let it finish. 9 months. Someone inside Blackthorn had been feeding information and moving money for 9 months. Before Aldrin. Before her. Before whatever had triggered Cassian's decision to bring her here. The person who had warned Aldrin to run was not a recent development. They were part of the original architecture. They were still here. Ichit. Cassian turned from the window after 40 seconds. She had been counting without meaning to. Dorev, he said. I don't know. His access would make it possible, but I can't. Not Dorev. His voice had the flat certainty of a man who has run the same calculation and arrived at the same exclusion. Dorev has been with this house for 22 years. He has nothing to gain from Marath. He has everything to lose. A pause. Corvin. She looked at him. Head of the accounting office, he said. 16 years of loyal service. Never a discrepancy. Never an error. Never a complaint. 16 years, she said. Perfect records for 16 years. And then Aldrin joins the Eastern office and the anomalies begin. He was looking at her with the stillness of someone who has just broken something open and is looking at what was inside. Aldrin was Corvin's hire. I approved it. I didn't make it. Corvin brought Aldrin in. Corvin knew the accounts well enough to know where to plant the anomalies below the review threshold. Corvin delivered the first 6 months of ledgers when you asked for 14. She stopped. He brought me the shortened version first. He wanted to see if I'd notice. And you asked for the rest. And Dora facilitated it, which Corvin would have known within the hour. The thing that had been 9 months of careful, patient architecture was, when you looked at it from this angle, very simple. Not simple in the way that meant stupid. Simple in the way that meant it had been planned by someone who understood the house completely and had used that understanding to place every piece exactly where it needed to be. 16 years. Cassian had trusted Corvin for 16 years, and Corvin had spent 9 months of that trust dismantling him from the inside. She did not say anything about this. It was not a thing that required comment. The weight of it was in the room already, filling the available space. He'll know Aldrin is gone, she said instead. He'll know that we know. If he's in communication with Crane, he is. Then he knows about the letter. Yes. He'll move today. He has to. Yes. Cassian moved to the door of the study and opened it and said to the corridor, to no one visible, 2 words. Find Dorev. A pause. Then from somewhere, yes, Your Grace. He came back into the room and looked at her. I need you to do something that you have every right to refuse, he said. She waited. Write back to Crane. Today. Tell him you're willing to meet his terms, that you'll get him what he wants. The air in the room had a particular quality now, the quality of a door that has just been pushed open onto something that cannot be unseen. You want me to be the trap, she said. I want you to be the reason he commits to paper. If Crane believes you've turned, he'll write to you again. He'll be specific enough that whatever he puts in the next letter cannot be reframed as a misunderstanding or a social arrangement. She looked at him. And if Corvin reads my outgoing correspondence before it leaves the house, then Corvin tells Crane that you've agreed, and Crane writes back with specifics, and we have Crane and Corvin both. And if Crane doesn't write back, if he sends someone instead. A silence. That is the risk, Cassian said. I won't pretend otherwise. She looked at him across the desk with the 2 folders between them, and the letter still sitting where she had set it. And she thought about the calculation she had been running since the night at the convocation when he had told her about Crane. She thought about the locked case she had brought from her father's house, and the 2 years of managing a deteriorating situation with the resources she had, and the intelligence she had, and the particular quality of mind that had always made her inconvenient. She thought about what it meant that he was asking her, not telling her, not engineering conditions, asking. I need something in return, she said. Name it. When this is over, however it ends, I want the document Crane has, not assurances, the document itself. If Crane is taken on the evidence we build, the document becomes legally irrelevant. I know, I want it anyway. I want to hold it myself. He looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. And I want to know, she said, who else you've been watching since I arrived. Not Crane, not Aldrin. Here, inside this house. Because you knew there was a problem in the Eastern accounts for 14 months, and you didn't act, which means you were waiting. You were building something, and I want to know what. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. And then Cassian Ravenshade did something she had not seen him do in 2 weeks at Blackthorn. He looked away from her, just for a moment, at the window, at the cold courtyard below, at the space between here and whatever answer he was choosing. When he looked back, his face had the quality of a man deciding to step off a ledge that he's been standing on the edge of for a long time. Aldrich, he said. She did not know who Aldrich was yet. She would learn. Within the hour, she would learn that Aldrich Fenmore was Cassian's chancellor of 20 years, the man who had stood at his elbow at the convocation with the easy manner of someone who had long since stopped calculating the personal cost of every word. She would learn that Aldrich's name appeared in 3 of Merath's correspondence records that Cassian had assembled over the previous 4 months. She would learn that the man Cassian Ravenshade trusted most completely in the world had been having private meetings with Duke Marath in Velmore for 6 months. Meetings that predated everything. Predated Aldrin, predated the Eastern account variants, predated the ghost employees in the maintenance budget. She would learn all of this within the hour. But first she watched Cassian say the name with the particular flatness of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and has just set it down in front of another person for the first time. "Your Chancellor," she said. "Yes." "You've known." "I've suspected. For 4 months." His voice was exactly level. It was the most controlled thing she had ever heard, that level voice, and under the control was something so much larger that she felt it the way you feel a river's current before you step in. "I have 3 pieces of correspondence. Not enough to act, not enough to be certain, enough to know I cannot use him in what comes next." "You've been running this investigation without your Chancellor." "Yes, with me instead." "With you instead." She looked at him and understood for the first time the full geometry of what she had walked into. Not the Crane situation, not the Eastern accounts, not the ghost employees. All of that was real, and all of that mattered. But underneath it, the thing that had actually brought her to Blackthorn was this. Cassian Ravenshade had looked across a receiving line, Oin at the winter convocation, and seen a woman whose path to the numbers would be completely different from anyone already inside his house. Not because she was brilliant, though she was. Not because she was available, though her family's circumstances had made her so. Because every single person who would normally have this conversation with him was potentially compromised. He had needed someone from outside. He had needed someone who had her own reasons to find out. He had needed someone Crane would underestimate. She sat with this for a moment, and it was not comfortable to sit with, and she did not perform comfort. "The letter to Crane," she said finally. "I'll write it. Today." He nodded once. "But I need you to understand something." She held his gaze. "I'm not doing this because you've engineered my situation so thoroughly that refusal is the least practical option. I'm doing it because Crane has documentation that could destroy my family, and it's time that stopped being true." She paused. "Those are different reasons." "I know," he said. "I want you to know that I know that you know." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, not quite that, but the shape of what a smile would be in a different man under different circumstances. "Understood," he said. Bamid. She wrote the letter in her sitting room with Marais standing guard at the door, and Thomas very carefully not reading what she was writing. She wrote it in the deliberate, slightly frightened register of a woman who had decided to cooperate, careful enough to be convincing without being careful enough to be clinical. She left in 2 small errors, tiny hesitations in the phrasing that would read as genuine anxiety to anyone looking for it. She sealed it and gave it to a household messenger and did not watch it go. Then she went to find Corvin. She found him in the accounting office in the East Wing, at his desk with the morning receipts, exactly where he always was at this hour. He looked up when she came in with the neutral expression of a man who has been maintaining neutral expressions for a very long time. "Lady Ashcombe," he said. "I wanted to thank you for the additional ledgers," she said. "The full 14-month set. It made the work considerably easier." A very small pause. "Of course." "I finished with the Eastern accounts." She let this land the way she intended it to land, with the weight of completion, not of discovery. "I'll be returning them today." He looked at her steadily. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I found what was there," she said, "which is usually how it works." She left the office and walked back through the corridor with the unhurried pace of a woman who was not afraid and not suspicious and had nothing particular on her mind, and she counted her steps and kept her breathing even and did not let the back of her neck show what it felt. Behind her, she heard Corvin's chair scrape. He was going to send word to Crane, to Marath, to Aldrin, wherever he had run to. He was going to confirm that the woman had finished with the Eastern accounts and appeared to have found nothing significant, which meant Crane would receive her letter and Corvin's reassurance within hours of each other, and the combination of the two would be irresistible. She turned the corner and found Cassian waiting, exactly where he had said he would be waiting, with Dorev at his shoulder and two of his household guard positioned in the corridor at a distance that was casual enough to be furniture until it wasn't. "He moved," she said quietly. "I know." Dorev heard the message go. He looked at her. "You all right?" It was the first time he had asked her that. She noticed it with the same careful attention she applied to everything else. "Ask me in 3 days," she said. The reply from Crane came in 2 days, not 3. It came through the same private courier, same seal, same unhurried handwriting. But this time it was 3 pages instead of 1, and the 3 pages contained enough specificity, dates, amounts, names, the precise mechanism by which the Eastern Port receipts were being routed through Marath's property company, that it was not a letter anymore. It was a confession. Crane's and Marath's both, written in the confident hand of a man who believed he was writing to someone he had already won. Seraphine read it at the desk in Cassian's study, with him standing across from her and Aldrich Fenmore, who had been recalled from Velmore that morning without explanation, seated in the chair by the window. She looked up from the letter. She looked at Aldrich. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has been in rooms like this before and knows how they end, and something in that expression, the too familiar quality of it, the resignation that had arrived before the accusation, confirmed what Cassian had told her more certainly than any correspondence could. Aldrich knew why he had been called back. He had always known this was coming. Cassian stood at his desk and looked at his chancellor of 20 years, and the silence between them was the most devastating thing Seraphine had witnessed since she arrived at Blackthorn. Not because of anything said, because of what the silence contained. 2 decades of genuine loyalty and genuine trust and genuine partnership, and underneath it, for 6 months, this. "How long?" Cassian said. Not loudly. Never loudly. Aldrich looked at him. "Longer than you think," he said. "And differently than you think." "Tell me differently." "I was trying to protect you." The words came out without apology, which was almost worse than if they had come out with it. "Marath approached me 8 months ago with evidence of what Crane was doing in the eastern ports. Real evidence. He wanted to use it as leverage over Crane, not expose it. He needed a channel into Blackthorn that didn't go through you." A pause. "I thought if I was in the room, I could manage it. I thought I could keep it from becoming what it became." "And the correspondence, the meetings." "Managing. Always managing." Aldrich's voice had the flat exhaustion of a man who has believed something about himself for a long time and is no longer certain it was true. "I thought I was navigating it. I thought I was buying time to find a way to bring it to you cleanly." 8 months, Cassian said. "You had 8 months to bring it to me." "I know." "And instead you—" "I was afraid," Aldrich said, "of what you'd do, of how far it would go." You don't stop, Cassian. When you move against something, you don't stop at the target. You move until the entire structure is gone, and people who were proximate to the problem get taken with it, and I have spent 20 years watching that, and I was afraid of being proximate." He paused. "That's it. That's the whole of it." Cassian was very still. The kind of still that had nothing to do with calm. She looked at him and saw, for the first time since coming to Blackthorn, something she had not seen before in his face. Not anger. She had expected anger. Something beneath anger, older than anger, the thing that exists in the space where certainty used to live before someone took it. He had built the last 4 months around the knowledge that someone he trusted was compromised. He had not built it around knowing that the reason was fear. The distinction was doing something to him that she watched happen and could not stop and did not know if she was supposed to try. "Leave," he said to Aldrich. "You'll be confined to your rooms pending a full review. Dorev will manage the arrangements." Aldrich stood. He looked at Cassian with the expression of a man who has given up the argument and is simply letting the consequence arrive. "I'm sorry," he said. Cassian did not answer. Aldrich left. The door closed. In the silence that followed, Seraphine did not move, and Cassian did not move, and the winter light through the windows was the same flat, cold light it had been every morning since she arrived, and the letter from Crane was on the desk between them. 3 pages of someone else's detailed self-incrimination, and all of it, All of the 14 months of Eastern account variance and ghost employees and Corvin's 16 years of patient architecture and Crane's 2 pages of confident confession suddenly looked different from the angle of the thing that had just happened in this room. Cassian turned to the window. She waited. After a long moment, without turning, he said, "I need you to understand that what happens next will not be clean. I know. People will be damaged, houses, families, careers that have nothing to do with this directly." He paused. "I need to know you can be in the room for that." She looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, which held everything he was not going to say. "I've been in rooms like this my whole life," she said. "I've just never been the one deciding what happened." He turned, and what she saw in his face was not the composure she had come to know, or the controlled attention, or the flatness that stood in for expression. It was something rawer than any of that. Something that had been behind the composure all along, that 20 years of careful architecture had kept invisible, and that the thing with Aldrich had stripped to the surface. He looked like a man who had just understood, fully and finally, that strength built entirely on certainty is not strength at all. It is only certainty, and certainty can be used against you by the people who know exactly where yours lives. "We have 48 hours, he said, before Crane realizes the letter didn't do what he needed it to do. "Then we start now," she said. And that was the moment. Not the letter, not Aldrich's confession, not the 3 pages of Crane's careful self-incrimination, when everything that had been arranged between them stopped being an arrangement and became something else entirely. Something neither of them had a clean word for. Something that was going to make the next 48 hours either the foundation of everything or the end of it. Cassian Ravenshade looked at Seraphine Ashcombe across the desk in the winter light and made the only decision left that wasn't already made. "Stay close," he said. She did not answer. She picked up the letter, folded it carefully, and put it in her pocket. She was already planning. The 48 hours did not last 48 hours. Crane moved in 31. Seraphine was in the accounting office at the eastern wing when she heard the first sound. Not an alarm, nothing so obvious as that. A quality of silence that replaced itself too quickly with the wrong kind of noise. Doors closing, boots on stone moving at the pace of men who had been given orders and were executing them, not the ordinary pace of a house going about its mourning. She set down the ledger she was holding and looked at Thomas. And Thomas, who had learned in 2 weeks at Blackthorn to read the temperature of a room from its acoustics, looked back at her. "Stay here," she said. She did not stay. The corridor outside the accounting office ran east toward the service entrance and west toward the main body of the house. She went west, toward the sound, which was the wrong direction by every measure of personal safety, and the only direction that made sense given that she needed to understand what was happening before she could be useful to stopping it. She found Dorev at the junction of the main corridor and the Great Hall passage, moving with the compressed efficiency of a man who was managing several things simultaneously and had decided the most important one was whatever was directly in front of him. "The East Gate," he said when he saw her. He did not slow down. "Stay inside the main house." "What's at the East Gate?" "Men, armed. Lord Crane's banner." He was already past her, already 20 feet down the corridor. "Stay inside." She turned toward the Great Hall and found Cassian coming the other direction. He was already dressed for it, not the formal clothing of the household dinners, not the working clothes of the estate office. Darker, heavier, the clothing of a man who had anticipated this possibility and had dressed accordingly when he woke that morning. He had a sword at his hip, which she had not seen before, and the sword looked like a thing that belonged there rather than a thing recently attached for the occasion. He saw her and did not slow down. "I told Dorev to keep you inside," he said. "You told Dorev to tell me to stay inside. That's different." She fell into step beside him because standing still while he walked past was not something her body was willing to do. "How many?" 30, maybe more on the road." His voice had the flat, compressed quality of a man running the numbers at the same time as running the corridor. "Crane is not at the gate himself. He sent his estate captain and a letter." "What letter?" "Demanding your surrender on a charge of theft of commercial documentation." She absorbed this without breaking stride. "He's using my documents." "The copies." "He's using the documents to create grounds. The grounds are pretextual. What he actually wants is to remove you from Blackthorn before we can move against him. He stopped at a doorway. 30 armed men at my gate is not a legal proceeding. It's a statement. What does the statement say? That he believes I won't fight for you. His eyes met hers, and in them was the particular, focused clarity of a man who has already decided and is simply communicating the decision. He is wrong. He went through the door. She went through it behind him. Beauchamp. The east gate of Blackthorn looked different at 9 in the morning with 30 armed men positioned outside it. The gate itself was closed, the heavy ironwood and steel construction that she had passed through without thinking on her arrival and now understood the purpose of. On the wall above the gate, 4 of Blackthorn's guards stood with the still readiness of men who had not moved from that position and did not intend to. Cassian stood at the interior of the gate and looked up at the wall. "Bren," he said. Not loudly. It carried anyway. One of the guards looked down. 32 men, Your Grace. 3 on the east road, positioned to cut. Captain Tove is at the gate with a document. Let Tove through. Close behind him. A pause from above. The pause of a man making sure he had heard correctly. Yes, Your Grace. The gate opened 12 inches. A single man entered. Middle-aged, gray-haired, built like someone who had served in military capacity before moving to a state service. He had a leather document case, and the expression of a man who had been given a job he found personally distasteful but was going to do it correctly. He stopped 6 feet from Cassian and stood straight. Your Grace, he said. Lord Crane. I know what Lord Crane wants, Cassian said. I want to hear how you say it. Tove looked at him. At Seraphine, standing 2 feet to Cassian's left. Back to Cassian. Lord Crane presents a formal demand for the return of Lady Seraphine Ashcombe to answer a charge of commercial theft. The documentation in question was obtained from the Crane family's private commercial records without authorization. He paused. Lord Crane requests that Blackthorn honor the demand as a matter of inner-house legal protocol. Does he? Yes, Your Grace. Cassian was quiet for a moment. The gate had closed behind Tove, and the sound of it closing had a finality that everyone in the courtyard felt. Captain Tove, Cassian said, you've served in a military capacity, before Crane. A slight stiffening. Briefly, Your Grace. Then you know what 32 armed men at a castle gate is, and you know it isn't a legal proceeding. Tove said nothing. Go back to your lord, Cassian said. Tell him that Lady Ashcombe is under the protection of Blackthorn and will remain so. Tell him that the letter he sent her 2 days ago is in my possession and that I know what it contains. Tell him, he paused. The pause had weight. Tell him that I have everything I need and that the only question remaining is how much of it I choose to use. Tove absorbed this. His face had the quality of a man translating something into a language his employer was not going to want to hear. Your Grace, he said, my lord has allies who... I know who his allies are. Cassian looked at him with the full weight of that attention. Go. Tove went. The gate opened and closed behind him, and in the courtyard the silence had a particular quality, the silence of a line that has been drawn and cannot be undrawn. Seraphine looked at Cassian. He's not going to retreat. No. 32 men is a statement. But the road position means he was planning for something beyond a statement. Yes. He turned from the gate. Come with me. What? The next 4 hours were the most compressed thing she had ever lived through. Cassian moved through his household with the particular qualities she had been watching for 2 weeks from the outside, now visible from the inside, and the inside was nothing like the outside. What looked from the outside like composure was, from inside, something closer to controlled burn. Every decision made at the speed of genuine emergency while the surface held absolutely still, because the surface was a tool, because a commander who shows his calculations to the room gives his enemies a map. He sent Dorov to the neighboring estate of Lord Vanner, Blackthorn's closest ally, with a message that Seraphine was not shown, but whose length suggested it was not a request. He sent 2 of his fastest riders north and south on the main roads, which he understood was information management, cutting off Crane's ability to communicate with anyone who might arrive faster than Vanner's men. He pulled Corvin from the accounting office and had him confined with Aldrich, which simplified the house considerably. And then he came back to the study and spread a map on the desk and started talking to his captain of the guard, a woman named Cecily, who was 35 and had the economy of movement of someone who had spent years learning not to waste it. And Seraphine stood at the edge of this conversation and listened with the quality of attention she gave to ledgers, not the surface, the structure underneath. "The East Road cut position," Cecily said, tracing the map. 3 men, blocking communication east. If Crane moves to the road, he's not retreating, he's repositioning. He won't reposition yet. Cassian was looking at the map with the stillness of a man for whom maps were not representations but actual terrain that he was standing inside. He's waiting for confirmation that I turned the demand down. When Tove reports back, he has 2 choices. He accepts the rejection and withdraws, in which case I have his letter and Aldrin's trail, and 3 months before the banking houses call in his debt on my request. Or, he escalates, Cecily said. He escalates tonight. While it's still early enough to frame as a response to provocation, she looked at the map, at the East Road, at the property to the north of Blackthorn's wall, where the tree cover came close enough to provide, she traced the geometry of it, concealment for men approaching on foot. "He has more men on the road," she said. Both of them looked at her. 32 at the gate is too obvious. If he wanted to take Blackthorn by force, he'd need twice that, and he knows you'd see him approaching. 32 is the distraction. She pointed at the northern tree line on the map. He'll have men coming through there tonight. Fewer. Targeted. Not to take the house. To take me. Cecily looked at Cassian. Cassian looked at the map, and at the northern tree line, and at Seraphine, and the look on his face was the one she had learned meant he had arrived at the same place by a different route and found her already there. "The north storage buildings," he said to Cecily. 4 men. I can put 6. Put 8. And pull the household staff from the north wing to the main building. He looked at Seraphine. "You'll move to the inner rooms tonight, the ones without exterior windows." "I'll move to the inner rooms," she said. "And you'll use the north wing as the point of engagement, because if they come for me and I'm not where they expected, you have them inside your walls. Yes, you're going to let them in. A controlled entry is better than a perimeter fight. At night, against men who think they know the layout." She looked at him. "They might know the layout, if Corvin gave them information. They'll know the layout as it was. I've been moving things since this morning." He said it with the flat simplicity of a man who had already thought of this and had already addressed it. And underneath the flatness was something she recognized now as the particular frequency of a man who does not waste energy on panic, because he needs that energy for everything else. She wanted to say something. She was not sure what. "All right," she said instead. Tit. Night came the way winter nights came at Blackthorn. Not gradually, but with the sudden commitment of a door closing. The house went to what looked like its ordinary evening from the outside. Lights in the expected windows, the ordinary sounds of a household settling, no evidence of the 8 guards positioned in the north storage buildings, or the fact that the inner corridors had been restructured since morning. Seraphine sat in the inner room with Marais and Thomas and the locked document case and listened to the castle's breathing. She had not wanted to be in the inner room. She had said so, twice, without complaint and without performance, just the direct statement that she would rather be where the information was. Cassian had looked at her with the focused attention she knew meant he was actually hearing her rather than managing her, and had said, "The information is wherever you are. I need to know exactly where that is." She had gone to the inner room. She sat with the document case in her lap and ran the geometry of the night. The letters, Crane's original demand, the 3-page confession, the record she had compiled. In the document case, all of it. The thing that had started as protection for her family and had become, in the 3 weeks since she had arrived at Blackthorn, something larger and more complicated and more real than protection. Marais was doing needlework with the focused calm of a woman who had survived many difficult evenings by concentrating on small stitches. Thomas was reviewing the ledger copies with the absorbed focus of a man for whom numbers were a more reliable universe than the current one. At 2 a.m, she heard it. Not an alarm. Not shouting. The particular quality of a silence breaking. The sound of wood under pressure. The distant low voices of men trying to be quiet, and then, sharply, the sound of a fight beginning, which was nothing like what fights sounded like in formal settings, and everything like what they sounded like in the dark. She stood up. Marais said, without looking up from the needlework, "He said to stay. He said to stay in the inner rooms." "That's the same. I'm still in the inner rooms." She moved to the door. "This inner room." She went into the corridor that connected the inner rooms and stopped at the junction where the east and north passages met. From here she could hear without being visible. The sounds from the north wing were controlled. Not a rout, not a disaster, the sounds of men who knew their ground fighting men who did not. Then a different sound, closer, behind her. In the passage to her left, which was not the north wing, which was the access corridor from the service stair, she turned. 2 men. Indoors, dark clothing, moving with the compressed purpose of people who had a specific destination and had reached it. They had not expected her to be standing in the corridor. She had not expected them to be in the corridor. The half-second of mutual surprise was the only one she had. She did the only thing available to her, which was make noise, not a scream, something more useful than a scream. A single hard impact of her fist against the door beside her, and the word she had heard Cassian use for the household guard. The word that meant now, that meant here, that meant this is the actual location. One of the men reached her. His hand closed on her arm, and the world compressed to the immediate physical reality of being pulled off balance, which she resisted with the whole weight of her body because her body understood before her mind did that the next 10 seconds were the ones that would determine everything. She heard boots on stone, fast. And then Cassian was there. She registered him the way you register lightning. Not the approach, just the presence, sudden and total. He came through the north junction with Cecily and 2 guards, and the fight in the corridor was over in the space of seconds. The kind of seconds that happen too fast for memory to record cleanly. Only impressions, the impact, the controlled violence of men who train every morning in the cold because this is exactly why. The particular efficiency of someone who has decided and is executing the decision without the gap that hesitation creates. The 2 men from the service stair were on the floor. Cassian was 2 feet from her with blood on his hand that might not be his and an expression on his face that she had not seen before in 3 weeks at Blackthorn. And what it was, she understood this with the strange clarity that sometimes comes at the end of an adrenaline spike, was not the composure she knew, not the controlled burn she had seen through 4 hours of managing a crisis. It was something that had gotten past the control entirely, in the 2 seconds between hearing her impact on that door and arriving in this corridor. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I told you to stay in the inner rooms," he said. His voice was exactly level. Every other thing about him was not. "I was in the inner rooms," she said. "This is an inner room." The 2 guards were securing the men from the service stair. Cecily was already at a runner's position, already heading back toward the north wing. The fight there was resolving. She could hear it resolving, the sounds winding down to the aftermath sounds, the human sounds of men who had been in a fight and were now at the end of it. Cassian reached out and took hold of her arm. Not rough, not gentle, just definite. The grip of a man who has his hand on something he is not going to let go of, and looked at it where the other man had grabbed her. "Are you hurt?" "No." He was still looking at her arm. His jaw was set with a quality she could feel through the grip on her arm, a tension that was not anger and not fear, and was something between the two that had no clean name. "Cassian," she said. He looked up. "I'm all right," she said. He said nothing, let go of her arm, took a single breath that she watched happen, watched the controlled burn reassert itself, watched the thing that had gotten past the control be deliberately managed back. "The North Wing?" she said. 11 men. Crane's Captain Tove was with them, which tells us this was not a rogue decision. He stepped back. His voice was fully level again. The only evidence of what had been in his face 30 seconds ago was the fact that it was gone. "We have 9. 2 ran. The East Road position is down. Vanner's men reached them an hour ago." She looked at him. "It's over. This part is over." "What's the next part?" He looked at her with the expression she now knew was how he looked when he was deciding how much to say. And the expression shifted into something slightly different, which was how he looked when he had decided to say all of it. In 6 hours, he said, I'm going to ride to Velmore with the letters, the ledger documentation, Crane's correspondence with Marath, and 9 men in custody, including Tove. I'm going to present it to the Crown and request a formal accounting. He paused. Crane will know before I arrive. Marath will know. They'll attempt to control the narrative before I can present evidence, which means they'll do something in those 6 hours to try to change the terms. What can they do in 6 hours? They can challenge my right to present evidence without a formal accusation. They can claim the investigation was conducted illegally, that the Eastern accounts were accessed without proper authorization. They can argue that you were brought here for exactly this purpose and that the documentation you compiled was deliberately obtained to frame their client. He looked at her steadily. They can make the case that Blackthorn's investigation is tainted because the primary investigator has a personal grievance against Crane. She understood. Me, she said. Your name is on the original documentation Crane threatened you with. Your prior relationship with the Crane family is a matter of record. Your presence at Blackthorn will be framed as motivated reasoning. He did not look away. The strongest version of their counter-argument is that I brought you here to manufacture this case, that we manufactured it together. The corridor was quiet now. Mairead had appeared at the door of the inner room with the expression of a woman who had spent 40 years watching bad situations and was assessing this one with the clear-eyed calm of someone who had survived all the previous ones. Seraphine looked at Cassian. So the question, she said, is whether the evidence is strong enough to survive that argument. The evidence is strong enough, he said. The question is whether the person presenting it is. She looked at him. You need to come to Velmore, he said. Not as my household guest, not as the woman whose family's debts I'm servicing. If you stand in front of the Crown and present the Eastern accounts yourself, Crane's argument that you were brought here to manufacture a case becomes, he paused, less useful, because the manufactured case argument requires that you were a passive instrument. It doesn't survive contact with you as a principal. The corridor was very still. She thought about her father, who was in Velmore right now, probably drinking his 4th glass of wine at whatever hour it was, and not knowing that his daughter was standing in a darkened castle corridor, with blood on the floor and a document case that could dismantle 2 powerful houses. She thought about the locked case and the copies, and the 2 years of managing other people's disasters with the tools she had, and the particular quality of mind that had never once been given the standing to deploy itself fully. She thought about what it would mean to stand in front of the Crown. She thought about what it would mean to let someone else stand there instead. What am I presenting as? She said. In terms of standing, what is my position when I walk in? Cassian looked at her, and this was the moment. She understood this clearly, with the cold precision that the adrenaline had sharpened her to. This was the moment that the last 3 weeks of careful arrangement and mutual calculation had been moving toward. Not the North Wing fight. Not the letters. Not Aldrin or Corvin or Aldrich's 20 years of genuine service and 6 months of fear. This, he said, as the Duchess of Blackthorn. The corridor held the word. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them moved. Outside, through the stone walls of the castle, the winter dark pressed with its patient, enormous weight, and somewhere in it Crane was already moving, Marath was already moving, and the riders who would carry word to Velmore before morning were already being saddled, and the whole machinery of the thing that had been building for 9 months was collapsing into the next 6 hours. And in a castle corridor with blood on the floor and a document case in her hand, Seraphine Ashcombe looked at the Duke of Blackthorn and understood that the answer she gave in the next 10 seconds would not be the end of something. It would be the beginning of everything. She opened her mouth. She said yes, not immediately, not with the breathless quality of a woman who had been waiting for the question. She said it the way she did everything, after a pause that was not hesitation but calculation, after running the full geometry of it, and arriving at the place where the answer was not just yes, but the only answer that made sense, given everything that had happened in the 23 days since a carriage had brought her through Blackthorn's gate in the kind of cold that had weight to it. Yes, she said, but I have conditions. Cassian looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not surprise, not at this point, but something warmer than what usually lived there. Something that had been making small, incremental appearances for 3 weeks and had not yet been given a name. "Tell me the conditions," he said. "The title is real, not strategic, not a position that expires when the crown proceedings are finished." She held his gaze. "If I walk into that room as Duchess of Blackthorn, I walk out of it the same way, whatever happens." "Yes. The Eastern accounts are mine to restructure, not to advise on. Mine." "Yes." "And Aldrich," she stopped, looked at him carefully. "I want to be in the room when you speak to him, not to intervene, to understand." A pause, longer than the others. "Why?" he said. "Because you've been carrying that for 4 months alone, and you're going to carry it wrong if no one is there." The corridor was very still. Outside the stone walls, the winter dark was beginning its slow, grudging retreat toward morning. Somewhere in the house a door opened and closed, the ordinary sound of a house resuming after something extraordinary, and in its wake, the silence had a different quality than any silence she had known at Blackthorn before. "Yes," he said. The word had a different weight than the previous ones. She nodded once. "Then let's get ready to ride. En chat." They reached Velmore before noon. The Crown's court of formal proceedings occupied the north wing of the royal palace, a series of connected chambers designed to conduct exactly the kind of accounting that happened in them with a regularity that suggested the kingdom's power structures had always needed an official space for their own dismantling. Seraphine had been in these rooms once, years ago, accompanying her father to a minor land dispute that had resolved in their favor largely because the other party's lawyer had misread a boundary notation. She remembered the light, the high, flat, impartial light of large windows that made everyone in the room look equally exposed. She walked in as Duchess of Blackthorn with the marriage documentation signed at 4 a.m. by a justice Cassian had summoned to the castle with the kind of authority that did not require explanation. The justice had been brisk and professional and had not asked questions, which suggested he understood the nature of the occasion. She wore the same blue dress she had worn to the winter convocation. She had not brought anything more formal to Blackthorn, and there had been no time to acquire it, and she had decided somewhere on the road to Velmore that this was the right choice anyway. She had worn this dress when she had first looked at Cassian Ravenshade across a receiving line and taken his measure. She would wear it now. Crane was already in the room. He had brought 2 lawyers and a notary, and the expression of a man who had spent the night rewriting a situation he no longer fully controlled and was committed to the rewrite regardless. When he saw Seraphine, when he looked at her and then at Cassian and understood what the presence beside the Duke meant, something moved through his face that he managed quickly, but not quickly enough. Duke Marath was absent. His lawyers had sent a letter. The letter cited illness, which was the language men used when they had decided the room was too dangerous to enter in person. The Crown's arbiter was a woman of about 60 named Sora Venth, who had the manner of someone who had seen every version of this kind of proceeding and had long since stopped being interested in the theater of it and had become interested only in the substance. She looked at the assembled parties with the flat, impartial attention of the high windows above her and said, "We'll begin with the documentation." Seraphine set the document case on the table. She presented it herself. Not Cassian's lawyers, not Cassian, her with Thomas beside her cross-referencing, moving through the Eastern account records and the ghost employee payments, and Crane's correspondence with Marath and the letter Crane had sent her with the focused clarity of a woman who had spent 3 weeks living inside these numbers and knew every turn of them by heart. Crane's lawyers interrupted 3 times. Each time she answered with the specific reference and the specific page and the specific figure that addressed the objection, without raising her voice, without performance, with the quality of a person who is not arguing but simply describing what is true. Arbiter Venth listened with her hands folded on the table and her eyes moving between the documentation and the woman presenting it. After 2 hours, she held up one hand. "Lord Crane," she said, "I'd like to hear from you directly." Crane looked at his lawyers. His lawyers looked at the documentation on the table. The documentation on the table did not look back, because it did not need to. What followed was the slow, grinding collapse of a structure that had been built carefully over 9 months by men who had believed they had more time. Crane spoke for 40 minutes, and the words were good words, organized, plausible, the words of a man who had rehearsed this. But the documentation was better than the words, and Arbiter Venth was better than the words. And Seraphine, who had once rewritten a trade agreement her father was about to sign at considerable personal loss, was considerably better than the words. When it was done, Crane sat in the chair across the table with the look of a man who has watched the floor of a room he was standing in simply cease to be there. Arbiter Venth looked at the documentation for a long, final moment. "I've seen enough," she said. To recommend formal proceedings against Lord Crane and Duke Marath for financial interference in Blackthorn's commercial operations. The matter of Duchess Ashcombe's prior documentation will be addressed as part of those proceedings. Any copies in Lord Crane's possession are hereby subject to court seal." She closed the folder. "We're adjourned." The afternoon was cold and clear, and the city looked the way it had looked from the palace windows at the winter convocation, distant, compressed into something almost beautiful. Seraphine stood in the palace courtyard while Cassian spoke with the crown's legal attaché and felt the particular quality of stillness that comes at the end of something that has been very loud for a very long time. Her father was in the city. She would have to see him. She would see him, and she would tell him what had happened and watch his face move through the sequence of expressions it always moved through. Relief first, then the complicated thing that was not quite gratitude and not quite guilt, then the retreat into something easier. She knew this sequence. She had watched it her whole life. She would see it, and she would feel what she always felt, which was the complicated love that had never simplified, and this time she would not manage it for him. She would let it be what it was. She was finding, in the aftermath of the last 3 weeks, that she had less patience for managing things that were not her responsibility to manage, and more clarity about which things were. Cassian came to stand beside her. They stood in the courtyard without speaking for a moment, and the silence between them was the kind that had been through enough to stop needing to be filled. "Marath will negotiate a settlement," he said finally. "He won't come to formal proceedings. Too much exposure." "And Crane?" "Crane will fight it. He has nothing left to lose by fighting." A pause. "It will take time." "Time I have," she said. "Apparently." He looked at her. The afternoon light was the flat winter light of the city, not Blackthorn's stone-filtered version of it, and in it his face looked different than it did in the castle. Not more vulnerable exactly, but more legible, as if the distance from his own walls had removed one layer of the architecture. "You were good in there," he said. "I know." Something almost happened at the corner of his mouth. "Most people can't say that without it sounding like vanity. Most people can't say it because they don't know what they're good at." She looked at the city. "I've always known what I'm good at. I've spent most of my life in rooms where it wasn't welcome." He said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, the words had the quality of something that had been sitting in a room alone for a while and was finally being let out. "I have not been easy to work with," he said. She looked at him. "In 3 weeks. I've asked you to do things that required you to trust me before you had any reason to. I engineered your arrival in ways that I told myself were about giving you choice, but were also about ensuring you'd come." He was looking at the city, not at her, which she understood was how he said the things he had no practice saying. "I need you to know that I know the difference." "I know you know," she said. "I've been watching you know it for 3 weeks." "That doesn't—" "Cassian." She waited until he looked at her. "I made my own choices. Every one of them. You gave me information and I used it. That's not manipulation. That's the closest thing to an equal arrangement I've ever been offered." She paused. "I'm aware that's a fairly grim statement about the previous 24 years of my life." He looked at her with the expression she had first seen across a receiving line and had been mapping ever since, the one that meant the calculation was running and the result was something he found genuinely, unexpectedly interesting. "We should go back," he said. "Before dark." "Yes." Neither of them moved for another moment. "The Eastern accounts," she said. "I want Thomas assigned officially to the audit team. He's been doing the work anyway." Done. "And the staff in the North Wing, the ones whose rooms were used last night, they should have the option to relocate within the house, being in the rooms where I'll tell Dorev." She nodded. looked at the city one more time. "Let's go home," she said. The word home sat in the air between them, and she heard it the way she heard things she had said without fully planning to, with the recognition that something true had gotten out before the careful management could catch it. Cassian looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Tête." Aldrich was confined to his rooms when they returned, and Cassian went to him that evening with Seraphine as she had asked, present, not intervening, occupying the chair near the window, while the two men who had built 20 years of genuine partnership and 6 months of catastrophic divergence sat across from each other in the lamplight and had the conversation that could not be had any other way. She watched Cassian listen. That was the thing she had not expected. Not his anger, which was present and controlled and real, but his listening. He sat with his hands still on the table and let Aldrich speak and did not interrupt, did not redirect, did not deploy the particular quality of his attention as a pressure instrument. He simply listened to a man he had trusted absolutely tell him, in full and without excuse, how that trust had been used and why. Aldrich spoke for a long time. When he finished, the room was very quiet. "I believed," Aldrich said into the quiet, "that I could handle it without involving you. I believed I was protecting you." He looked at his hands. "I think what I actually believed was that I was protecting myself from the version of you that handles things, that doesn't stop at the edge." Cassian was quiet for a moment. "You were afraid of me," he said. "Yes. After 20 years. Because of 20 years? Aldrich looked up. "I know what you're capable of, Cassian, better than anyone. I know how far you go. I've watched you go there, and I've told myself it was necessary, and I've helped you go there. And after 20 years, I looked at Marath's information and I thought, I don't want to be in the room for where this goes. I don't want to watch it again." He paused. "That was the wrong choice. I know that now. I knew it 6 months ago and made it anyway." The lamplight between them was very still. Cassian looked at his chancellor, his former chancellor, with the expression of a man sitting with a weight he had been carrying for 4 months and had just finally set on the table where it could be seen clearly. What it looked like, in the light, was grief. The specific grief of someone who has lost a version of a relationship they thought they understood. He was finding out, as she had found out 3 weeks ago in a corridor with a document case in her hand, that the thing you build your certainty on can be something different from what you thought it was and still be real. That the difference between what you knew and what was true was not always betrayal. Sometimes it was just the distance between what people showed and what they carried. "You should have come to me," Cassian said. "Yes. 6 months ago, 8 months ago, you should have come to me and told me what Marath had and let me go as far as you go," Aldrich said. "I know." A silence. "You were right," Cassian said, "that I would have." Aldrich looked at him. Something moved through the old man's face, not relief exactly, but the expression of a man who has been dreading a conversation and has arrived at the end of it to find it was not what he expected. Not forgiveness, not yet, and maybe not ever in the form he'd known before, but honesty, the kind that requires two people who are both willing to see clearly. "What happens now?" Aldrich said. "You'll face the formal review. The proceedings will require your testimony about the Marath meetings." Cassian paused. "I'll tell them you were attempting to manage the situation, not enable it, because that's what I believe." "And after?" Cassian looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in a year." It was not absolution. It was not the clean ending of the story they had both inhabited for 20 years. It was something more honest than either of those things. The acknowledgement that some things broke in ways that needed time to understand, and that understanding was a longer road than resolution. Aldrich nodded. Once. The nod of a man accepting terms that were the best available and more than he had earned. Seraphine rose from the chair by the window and walked out into the corridor and let the door close behind her, and she stood in the quiet stone corridor of Blackthorn and felt the particular exhaustion of a situation that had resolved into something true instead of something comfortable. Cassian came out 10 minutes later. He stood beside her in the corridor, and they were quiet together for a moment in the way they had been quiet together in the palace courtyard. the silence of two people who have been through enough together that silence is no longer empty. "That was hard," she said. "Yes." "He was telling the truth." "I know." "You knew before I said it." "Yes." He looked at the corridor wall, at the stone that had been there for 200 years, indifferent to every version of this kind of conversation. The hardest kind of betrayal is the kind that comes from fear, because you can't entirely separate it from love. She looked at him. He said it with the flatness of a man who had just understood something about himself, not only about Aldrich, but about the kind of authority he had built, and what it did to the people inside it. The kind of understanding that does not arrive clean, but arrives anyway, unasked for and necessary. "The version of you that handles things," she said, "that doesn't stop at the edge." He looked at her. "Is that who you want to be?" she said. Still, the question sat in the corridor between them. She had not planned to ask it. She had been watching him for 3 weeks, mapping the composure and the controlled burn and the particular quality of attention he gave to problems worth his time. And she had formed opinions about all of it that she had been keeping carefully in the working file of her own mind. She had not planned to ask the question tonight, but he had said a true thing a moment ago, and the room they were standing in was full of true things. And she was finding that after 3 weeks at Blackthorn, she had lost most of her patience for anything less. Cassian was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said, "not entirely." She waited. "I built something that worked," he said slowly, the words coming from somewhere he did not usually go to in conversation. "Everything I built, it worked. The estate, the accounts, the political arrangements, the fear, it all worked, and I told myself that was enough, that results were the answer to every question about method." He paused. "And then a woman at a receiving line looked at me like she was taking the measure of a door she didn't trust, and I spent 3 weeks watching someone think clearly about something I'd been thinking about for 14 months, and I realized I had built a house so well defended that the people inside it were afraid to tell me when it was on fire." She looked at him. The man who had stood at the winter convocation with his back to the room, watching the city through the window with the composure of someone who had never needed to turn around, was not entirely the man standing in this corridor. Not because the composure was gone. It wasn't. It was still there. It might always be there. But there was something beside it now that had not been there before, or had been there and had not been visible. The knowledge that strength built entirely on certainty was only certainty, and certainty was not the same as being right. "You're going to have to tell people they can come to you," she said, "not once, regularly, and mean it." "I know." "Including me. Especially you." Something moved through his face, the almost smile she had been cataloging since the convocation. "You'll tell me anyway." "I will," she said, "but it's better if you ask." He looked at her with the full weight of that attention, the attention she had learned to read as rare, the attention he gave to things that were genuinely worth his time. And for a moment, the corridor was just the corridor. Stone and lamplight and the ordinary quiet of a house that had been through a hard night and was settling into what came after. "I'm asking," he said. She looked at him. At the man who had told her the truth at the convocation when he didn't have to, who had given her the tools to walk away and had not been entirely certain she wouldn't use them, who had built a house so defended it kept him inside it as much as it kept others out, who had sat in a room tonight and listened instead of deciding, and who was standing in a corridor at the end of an extraordinarily long day and asking. "The morning briefing," she said. "I want to be in it, not consulted after. In it. Done. The North Storage Building, the one used last night. Don't repair it the same way. Put windows in. It's too dark." He looked at her for a moment. "Done." "And you need to sleep," she said. "You've been awake for 36 hours. So have you." "I know. I'm going to sleep. I'm telling you to also." The almost smile arrived fully, for the first time since she had met him. Not the shape of it, but the thing itself, the real version, brief and undefended and entirely unlike the composure it lived behind. "Yes," he said, "Duchess." She turned toward her rooms. "Seraphine," he said behind her. She stopped, did not turn immediately. When she did, He was looking at her with the expression she had first catalogued at the receiving line and had been revising every day since, the one that meant the calculation was running. The one she now knew meant she was what the calculation was about. "Thank you," he said. "For the conditions." She looked at him. "The conditions were for me." "I know," he said. "That's why." She held his gaze for one more beat. Then she turned and walked down the corridor toward her rooms, and the lamplight followed her the way it always did in Blackthorn. The light of a house that was old and functional and had been built to last, moving across stone that had held through everything and was still holding. Spring came to Blackthorn the way it always came, not suddenly, not gently, but with the patient insistence of something that had been building under the surface for a long time and had simply decided it was time. The Eastern accounts were restructured in 4 months, with Thomas officially heading the audit team, and Corvin replaced by a woman from the Northern Estates named Vel, who had spent 10 years managing trade records for a shipping concern, and brought to the work the same quality Seraphine brought to everything. Not the absence of error, but the honest, rapid correction of it. The formal proceedings against Crane concluded in late spring. Morath settled. The documentation Crane had held, the copies, the originals, every version of the papers that had been hanging over the Ashcombe family for 8 months, was returned to Seraphine by court order on a Tuesday morning, placed in her hands by a court officer who did not know what it meant to the woman receiving it, and therefore did not understand why she stood in the courtyard of the royal palace for a long moment, alone, looking at the sealed package. She opened it, read through it once. Then she walked to the outdoor brazier that the palace gardeners used for burning leaf waste, and she put the papers in it, and she watched them go. It took less than a minute. 8 months of a threat that had shaped every calculation she had made reduced to something that didn't need to be carried anymore. She stood at the brazier for a moment after, not with the dramatic satisfaction of a scene, just standing there in the spring light, and felt the particular quiet of something genuinely resolved. Her father's debts were cleared. She had told him in the conversation at Velmore that had gone exactly as she had predicted. Relief first, then the complicated thing, then the retreat. That the clearing was not a rescue. That she had made choices that were hers, and the outcomes were hers, and he was the beneficiary of them, and that she needed him to understand the order of those things. He had looked at her with the expression of a man encountering something he was only partially equipped to receive. She had let him encounter it. Aldrich left Blackthorn in early spring, after the formal review, with a pension and a letter of reference that Cassian had written himself, in his own hand, which she had read once at his request, and had not commented on except to say that it was accurate. He had written, "Aldrich Fenmore served this house with genuine dedication for 20 years, and made one decision in the 21st that compromised that service. The decision came from fear rather than from malice, which I believe is the most honest accounting of it I can provide. He was good at his work for 20 years. That is true regardless of how the work ended. She had not commented on it because there was nothing to add. It was precisely true. And precision, she had learned, was Cassian's version of generosity. He was learning to show it differently. Not well yet, not naturally, but with the honest clumsiness of a man who had spent 20 years building one way of operating and was now reconstructing it alongside someone who was willing to say when the reconstruction was going wrong and what needed to be different. The morning briefings were different. Not because he had changed his fundamental nature. He had not. The composure and the controlled burn and the quality of attention were all still there, still his, still the things that made him effective and difficult, and entirely himself. But there was a chair at the table now that had not been there before, and the person in it asked questions he had been asking alone for years, and the answers were sometimes different when there were 2 people arriving at them. That was the thing about damage she was finding. Not the dramatic damage, not Crane's letter or Aldrich's 6 months, or the men in the corridor at 2 a.m. The older damage. The kind that had been built over years carefully, by a man who had taught himself that certainty was the answer to vulnerability, that the architecture of control was protection rather than isolation. It didn't go away. It didn't transform into something uncomplicated. What happened instead was slower and more real than transformation. The gradual, incremental work of a person learning to let something be seen that they had kept out of sight for a long time. The work of someone else learning to look at it honestly and not look away. Some mornings she caught him at the window that looked over the eastern courtyard, watching the soldiers drill in the cold, and she knew he was running something. A decision, a calculation, the weight of something he had not figured out how to say yet. She did not always ask. Sometimes she brought him coffee and stood beside him and let the silence do what it did, which was hold things until they were ready. Some mornings he found her at her desk before the briefing, already 3 hours into the accounts, and he put coffee on the corner of the desk without asking, and she did not look up, but she heard it, and that was enough. There was a garden on the south side of Blackthorn that had been badly maintained for years, and that she had noticed on her second day and had been quietly badgering Dorev about ever since. By the end of spring, it was being replanted, which had nothing to do with the governance of the duchy or the eastern accounts or any of the things that occupied the working hours of their days. It was just a garden. She wanted it. Cassian had looked at the replanting plans once, with the focused attention he gave to everything, and said, "The drainage is wrong on the south bed." She had looked at him. "It'll flood in heavy rain. The grade needs to shift 2 degrees. She had taken the plans back to the gardeners and told them to shift the grade. The garden, by the time the last snow was gone and the ground was soft enough to work, was going to be very good. She knew this the way she knew numbers, not from optimism, but from the honest reading of what was actually there. In the evenings, when the briefings were done and the accounts were closed and the letters answered, they walked the east wall of the castle, not by design, not as a formal arrangement, just because the east wall had the best view of the valley, and they had both ended up there enough times that it had become a thing they did. One evening in late spring, with the last of the cold gone from the air and the valley below beginning to green at the edges, she said, "Tell me what you actually thought when I told you I had conditions." He looked at the valley for a moment. "I thought I had miscalculated." And then I thought I hadn't." He paused. "I thought that someone who had conditions was someone who knew what they were worth. And I had spent 20 years in rooms full of people who would agree to anything I proposed, and I had stopped being able to tell whether they agreed because the proposal was good or because I was the one making it." He looked at her. "You were the first person in a long time who treated the proposal as a proposal." She looked at the valley, at the green coming in at the edges, at the long view that the east wall offered, the kind of view that made the immediate concerns of a house look like what they were, important, real, but positioned inside something much larger and much longer. "I spent 2 years," she said, "managing a situation I didn't create with the resources I had, making sure nothing collapsed. I got very good at it. And I got very good at not asking whether that was what I wanted, because asking didn't change the answer." She paused. "What I wanted was a room where what I could do was worth something. Not managed, not accommodated. Worth something." "And now?" he said. She looked at him. At the man who had built a house so defended it had kept him inside it, who was standing on the east wall of that house in the spring evening with the composure still in place, but something beside it now that had not been there in the winter. "Now I have the room," she said. "I'm still figuring out what to do with all the habits I built for not having it." He looked at her with the expression she had first catalogued at the winter convocation, the one that meant she was what the calculation was about. "You could stop managing things that aren't yours to manage," he said. She looked at him. "You could ask for help before the 14th month." A pause. "Yes," he said. "We could both do that." The valley below was very still in the evening light, the kind of still that came at the end of a long day when the work was done, and the thing that remained was just the fact of being where you were, with the person beside you, in the particular quiet of something that had not been easy and was therefore real. She turned from the wall. "Come inside," she said. "It's getting cold." He turned from the wall. They walked back into Blackthorn together, and the great gate of the castle closed behind them with the sound it always made, the deep, settled sound of something that had been built to hold and was doing what it was built for. And the evening closed over the valley like a hand closing over something worth keeping, not perfect, not uncomplicated, not the clean resolution of every damage that had been accumulated across the months and the years, and the particular loneliness of people who are very capable and very alone, but real, chosen, built on the honest accounting of what was actually there by two people who had looked at each other clearly enough to stop pretending they could do better alone. That was enough. That was, in the end, the only thing that ever was.